Alright everyone, a little bit of analysis of the polling that is going on right now with regards to Trump's approval or lack thereof. Will show you, the oversampling appears to have continued. This has been going on now for some time. This was a big thing during the election. A lot of people that were, they were more on the Clintonian side of politics. They weighed in on the claim that the polls were wrong, that they were systemically skewed in one direction, was cast aside by them. It was laughed off, and they're like, oh yeah, this is like what Karl Rove said back in 2012 when he had his infamous unskewed polls. And of course they didn't pan out, and basically, you're a laughing stock. You're a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist if you believe this. I looked at the polling methodology, and I said it's not the same as when Romney and Rove got together to make this claim so many years ago. When they were claiming it, there was no fundamental reason to believe that there was sampling bias at the time, because it didn't appear to be systemically skewed. It appeared that Rasmussen and some of these other firms that were showing Romney ahead in a few key states, that they were wrong. They were the ones doing the skewing because of the nature of the election. There was also no reason to believe that there would be differential turnout. In fact, if there was, it would be in Obama's favor at the time, because he managed to have a larger, what seemed to be, this was my reading of it, a larger core audience that really liked him, that would have high turnout. Romney's was smaller. That is, they had a similar number of fans overall. It wasn't a huge difference. But Mitt Romney was like a wet blanket, and so there was no reason to believe, oh yeah, well, there will be higher turnout among his fans, therefore these polls may not tell the true story. However, in the last election, that was not the case. There was an enormous reason to believe that there would be differential turnout. One look at the kind of rallies that were being held by the respective candidates would have shown you this. There was polling bias, a significant amount. Some polling firms were off the mark by as much as 7% in some of the key states. So when people said, well, Hillary Clinton's ahead by like 6 points nationally, she's ahead by 4 or 5 in Michigan, she's ahead by 3 or 4 in Wisconsin, she's way, way ahead in Pennsylvania, she's got Florida. People like Nate Silver, who judged the election improperly, we're looking at polling aggregates and using old measures, old metrics to judge what proportion of trust should be placed in these various polling firms. The problem is with Nate Silver and others, Rasmussen and YouGov and some of the polling firms that did fairly well in the final result were largely left aside and not even counted, or they were counted for as less, even than partisan polling firms. Like MSNBC conducts a poll. We have evidence that MSNBC was directly coordinating with the Clinton campaign. What the fuck do you think that they're saying when they say, oh yeah, Hillary's like 10 points ahead in New Hampshire. She's like 7 points ahead in Virginia. Don't worry, she's got this. Shill for Hill. It's polling bias. Now, part of this is unintentional. And I'll tell you why. Before people go off into, well, it's a conspiracy land. Maybe in some cases. And that does drag the aggregate to the side. And that is a polling bias. It's a more willful one. There's also unwillful polling bias. What you have is a situation where old metrics are being used in which Democrats are simply more common than Republicans. There's also skewing, it appears in the polling, towards liberalism. That is, instead of people who are self-proclaimed Democrats but counting moderates as the bulk of Democrats, they're counting the bulk of them as liberals. They're asking primarily a bunch of liberal Democrats and even a handful of people who are Republican but consider themselves left-leaning, and very, very few actual conservatives. See, here's the problem. Turnout was very high among the hardcore, staunch conservatives, for the most part. Maybe not so much within the religious fringe, because of course Trump's not a hyper-religious individual, but among fiscal conservatives and social conservatives of the non-religious variety, quite high. He also managed to capture a significant number of moderate Democrats, business Democrats, and they're being undercounted in the polls too. If you fix for that, if you assume that there are 20 or 30% more Democrats in the country than Republicans, the polling makes sense. But that's the sort of flawed methodology that was used during the election. What I see still, I hold to this, what I see is that Trump still has a significant proportion of the population extremely excited about him being in office. If he runs for re-election, which I now presume probably is the case, I don't think he's going to choose to be a one-term president unless he utterly collapses, physically or in polling. He runs again. That core fan base will continue to be extremely excited about him. Some of the business Democrats may be too. If the economy keeps churning along, there are no major economic problems, especially if the Republicans do well in the midterm, so, you know, they feel refreshed, they feel empowered as a party. Going into the 2020 election optimistic about Trump, so maybe he faces less opposition. It'll be a free-for-all, he'll do just fine. In fact, it would be, if you look at the skewing of the polling that we see right now, and there's no reason to believe that this country comprises a significantly higher number of partisan Democrats than Republicans. I think, again, looking at the election, looking at anything else under the sun, that just doesn't make sense to me. It shouldn't make sense to anyone else either. I think Trump does just fine in 2020. I think he probably wins. Unless there's a viable candidate put up against him, that's the other big stumbling block for the Democratic Party. They don't really have right now anyone who stands out as a viable candidate other than Sanders, who's been lambasted by all of the neoliberals within the Democratic Party and isn't even himself technically a Democrat to begin with, who differentiates significantly from the sort of Tom Perez, Hillary Clinton platform of the DNC. So he's not going to be the Democratic candidate. He'll never be president of the United States. I'm sorry to the Bernie fans. You may like him. I may like him better than Clinton, honestly, except on some fiscal issues, but he's not going to be the president of the United States. It's not going to happen. He'll be lucky to still be alive in 2020. He's 74 years old. At some point, he's going to grind down. He's going to have to give it a rest. We're sitting here talking about Clinton being unhealthy or Trump being kind of old because he's like, 69, 70 years old. Bernie Sanders is almost half a decade older. It's just not going to happen. He's going to be almost 80 years old at the time. It's impossible. Who else? Let's see. Let's take a look. Well, you've got Tim Wise. He's been mentioned by some, but, most people have never heard of him. Name recognition matters. O'Malley was a decent, fairly well-spoken candidate. Jim Webb, a great guy. Infinite accolades, also produced a hit movie. Very, very stable. Would have been extremely business Democrat friendly. He probably would have beaten Trump if he had gone up against, but he didn't have any name recognition. He never broke like 3-4% in the polling at his peak, and then he drops out. Then he talks about, maybe I'll have an independent campaign, and of course he doesn't. He decides to back down. He's older too, by the way. Jim Webb probably could have won. Martin O'Malley would have done better than Hillary Clinton, arguably. And half the time during the debates, what did he say? I've got a green energy plan. We're going to build 50% solar by 2030, or some arcane number nobody could remember. And that was basically his contribution. He was an afterthought within the debates that he actually got to attend anyway. That's the form of the Democratic Party today. But really, if you've got poll skewing going on, don't the Democrats understand that this is a dangerous game to play to try to make Trump look less popular than he is? Don't you understand that that's actually dangerous for your electoral chances? Look, you go into the midterms. Here, it's a perfect storm. You'll go into the midterms with all the polling telling you that things are just fine and people won't turn out as much. They're already demoralized. Look, the Democrats already got hammered in the House. They don't control the House. They don't control the Senate. Trump won. They control an extremely small proportion of state legislatures. They lost a bunch of governors. Total demoralization. There are no significant stars within the party to lead them into the midterms. Hillary Clinton is now dead baggage on the Democratic Party. Tom Perez is too scandal-ridden to lead the party effectively. Bernie Sanders is so embattled at this point, all he can do is talk ideology. He's got a half a dozen actual Democrats on board, by the way, in so doing. They're not going to play nice with the neoliberals and the rest of the party. They feel backstabbed, and kind of rightfully so. I feel sorry for all the millions of Bernie Sanders fans. Even if I never would have voted for him, I feel your pain because you get totally fucking screwed by the DNC. And meanwhile, all this while, You're telling people, oh, the Democrats are ahead nationally like 10, 20 points. Oh, things are just, it's great for the Democratic Party. We're going to do just fine. That's what you tried during the 2016 election. You were looking at flawed polling data. Nate Silver, who supposedly is a genius, was looking at the same flawed data, making it even more flawed, saying, oh yeah, Hillary Clinton's got like a 99% chance of winning. And Politico and the New York Times, everyone at the beginning of the night, what happened? All of these different metrics where, you know, I think it was the New York Times had that little dial, and it was all the way over to Hillary Clinton. Oh, 99% chance of winning election. Oh, yeah, party. We might as well break out the beer right now. It's going to be great. She's going to just hammer the shit out of Trump. He's going to win every competitive state. He's going to be disgraced. He's going to go stomp off and cry, basically. Instead, over the course of only a few hours, slowly that little dial moved, and it was glorious. Though in the entire while, I'm sitting there watching it when it crosses over the 50% point. Thought it was hilarious. Oh, you mean that there's actually a chance that Trump wins? Nate Silver keeps reconfiguring his projections throughout the night, and at the end of the night, he looks like a catfish. He's all greasy and like red, slack-eyed, and it looks like he had 10 too many drinks, maybe some other substances. And it was funny. He's like, oh yeah, I really fucked this one up. That's because, how could you're Nate Silver. In the last 3 election cycles, you did great. And you're looking at flawed polling data, and you don't even appear to know that it's flawed. Either that or you were complicit in lying to people. There's your real problem. The polling data is totally skewed. Yeah, there are 20-30% more Democrats than Republicans in the nation. Okay, yeah, I believe that. Oh, twice as many people consider themselves liberal as conservative. Okay, yeah, I totally believe that. What about independent voters? Oh, fuck them. There's like half as many as there should be. Yeah, screw them too. By the way, some of these Republicans are liberals too. Where's the moderate Democrats? Huh, they don't exist. That's about the most pie-in-the-sky scenario you could have going into the midterms. Yeah, I'm sure that would be great for the Democratic Party, but that's not reality. That's probably at least a good 5-10 points removed from reality. And if you take a hammering during the midterms, while telling people, oh yeah, don't worry, we've got this in the bag because you're skewing all the polls, don't you realize how demoralized the Democrats lay people will be? And they're not going to turn out to vote in high numbers. If I see that a candidate is ahead by 10-15% and I think that the polls are real, do I feel an urge to vote? Like, it removes some of the fervor from people who ultimately, they really want to vote, but they're voting against the other candidate because they're afraid of them. What happened during the 2016 election is that a lot of people who really hated or were afraid of Trump did not vote because they assumed Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in. Probably some hundreds of thousands of people, or maybe even a few million, fit into that slot nationwide. People who would have voted, they had a reason to vote, at least against the other candidate. They would have turned out at decent numbers, but they didn't bother to show up because, yeah, screw it. Yeah, Hillary Clinton will be president tomorrow. It's okay. Trump will never win. This is actually good news, by the way, to any Trump fans there. You should be happy that they're skewing the polls, because this is what will end up happening during the midterm elections, and it'll weaken the Democratic Party further. Not that that's great news for Trump in a vacuum, because a lot of the resistance he's facing is from within the Republican Party. It would almost be a worthy strategy if all these progressives abandoned the Democrats altogether and said, oh, no, we're not even going to bother campaigning. We're going to tell our fans on the sly they should just vote for the Republicans who are running because they're more likely to oppose Trump. You see Nancy Pelosi now saying, oh yeah, I trust Trump on infrastructure and immigration, shaking his hand, having a great time. Her own fans are lambasting her. She might not get reelected because she's working with Donald Trump. He's setting up the Democratic Party for a total meltdown come the midterms. Just watch. Just watch and see if that's not what happens. I think at this point, it would be a safe assumption. You know, we're getting towards October here. We're marching towards the end of this year. And into the next, where we have the midterms, what do you think's going to happen to all those Democrats that are shaking hands with Donald Trump? And they were already weak to begin with because the party has largely imploded. The Democrats don't control anything. On the state level, they're doing even worse than at the federal level. And midterms, usually the Republicans do at least a little bit better. Historically speaking, over the last, half a dozen cycles or so, the Republicans have exceeded expectations during midterm elections. in an election where most of the seats up, at least in the Senate, I believe, are Democratic seats anyway, that they all have to defend. They're also behind on fundraising right now. Trump's got, hundreds of millions of dollars to spare. He can open up that purse, throw that money to the Republicans in Congress, and probably, essentially, Trump would be bribing dozens of people in the Senate. Now, if he does this, it's not an illegal bribe, because he's just saying, well, I'm the leader of the Republicans at this point, I'm the president. So, I'm taking this money that I've built up for my fundraising here. You can have it. You need it more than I do. It's a midterm election. And in that way, he can control large swaths of the House and the Senate. The Democrats don't know what they're walking into right now with this skewed polling business. This is worse. This is more skewed than the polling that we had during the election, which swung 5 or 6 points towards Trump in the, when compared with the actual polling aggregate. And once again, you have Rasmussen, YouGov, a few of these sites. They're showing Trump with significantly higher approval, still in the 40s in many cases, than all of these other firms saying, oh, he's got like 29% approval. Oh, it's so terrible. And you watch, his approval right now is also rising. This was reported on by Business Insider. Said, oh yeah, in the last few polls, he's, post-Charlottesville, he's actually going up in the polling. That's because he's using MAGA. He's using the, we're Americans message and refusing to attack single groups. Like the Democrats want him to. Why do you think the Democrats pretended to be, and they were pretended to be outraged when Trump said, oh, Americans condemn violence in all forms? It's not because they actually believe that. It's because they want him to zero in on one group of people that they know overlaps slightly with his core fan base so he can alienate them and drop an approval. He refused to do that. The average centrist American has no problem with Trump saying, yeah, I condemn all violence. The average sane individual is not going to see that as a dog whistle to Nazis. He would have, he was well warned, I think, to do what he did. And he rose in approval thereafter. And he's probably going to keep rising for some time to come, unless something catastrophic happens. The economy collapses, war begins. He's getting it right on North Korea, according to most people's estimations. The Democrats, meanwhile, are all talking about how good Kim Jong-un is and how we should leave him alone. That's not a winning campaign strategy. Trump has forced him into a corner on that issue. By doing the tweet at Kim Jong-un thing, he's forcing the Democrats, who are used to dichotomous wedge issues, it's how they conduct campaigns and have for decades, it's forcing them to defend North Korea. That's a big mistake. The NFL. What you saw last night, everyone in the media is like, oh, well, Trump has awakened a sleeping dragon. No, what Trump did is attack a multi-billion-dollar corporate entity with 7-figure salaried football players who will be perceived of as whiners by the average person, including a lot of football fans that are going to look at it and say, I'm tired of football being politicized. Just want them to throw the ball around. Come on, can we get back to watching the game? Because they're sports nuts. It's the reason they watch. They're not watching it for some fucking political message. It's how you destroy the entire franchise. By the way, good riddance. I don't care about football. I'll be talking about that later, too. Trump right now is setting up to give a good hammering to the Democrats. They don't even see it coming. They're still trying to be dismissive of him, use the skewed polls, and shitpost online, like with their shill groups that we know exist. It's not a fucking secret. It's funny. In closing here, on the topic of propaganda. The same people that are saying, well, Russian troll bots are all over online trying to influence public discourse, won't admit that a political entity within the United States would do the same thing. Oh, how lost and delusional you are if you think that that's actually the truth. How fucking delusional must you be? Yeah, pretty out there. I think you need to go to the funny farm for a little while if you actually think that's a sane position to take. Oh, our government would never do such a thing. Or a political entity within the government, a corporation that represents the Democratic Party. They would never do such a thing. Now, just ignore David Brock and the fact that that's basically his stated mission in life. Yeah, we're gonna troll and shill and propagandize. Even the DNC he was being so open about it, even the DNC had to back off on their public support of his mission. That's really what's happening within the country. Those skewed polls don't show reality. Not even close. That's about all. Peace out.